You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 3rd of May. Sergeant Nightingale facing retrial. Race war fear after Islamic terrorists target EDL. Somalian sex attacker can't be booted out of the UK. The big chill as Berlin declares France a problem state. Athens police make good mayor's vow to prevent Golden Dawn handing out free food in Syntagma Square. Turkey becomes partner of China, Russian-led security bloc. Austerity is hurting our health, say researchers. 60% of Muslims in Egypt and Pakistan support the death penalty for leaving Islam. The weird obsession with chemical weapons. Thought for the day, Prophet Afzal or Prophet Farage. And finally, bacon, black pudding, beans and WTFIT. UK News. Sergeant Nightingale facing retrial. An SAS sniper faces a retrial over illegally possessing a pistol and ammunition despite a last-minute claim prosecutors acted improperly by consulting on the case. Sergeant Danny Nightingale, 38, today pleaded not guilty at Bulford Military Court Centre in Wiltshire to illegally possessing a Glock 9mm pistol and more than 300 rounds of ammunition. He was convicted and sentenced to military detention last year for keeping the Iraqi pistol as a war trophy before having his sentence reduced, and conviction subsequently quashed by Court of Appeal judges. World at 8 says, our military should be busy deporting foreign illegals and criminals out of our country, not persecuting one of their own for fun. Race war fear after Islamic terrorists target EDL. Esmeralda Weatherwax, writing for the New English Review, says, I'm glad to see that the authorities and the media have their priorities in order after yesterday's convictions of the 6 Muslim men who intended to attack the EDL rally in Dewsbury last year. The Telegraph's Jake Wallace-Simpson, not their finest blogger, is pleased that the conviction shows that British justice is impartial, protecting even the abhorrent EDL. The Daily Mail and a few others do understand that many people, including police officers and bystanders, as well as men and women of the EDL, would have been murdered. Others seem more relieved that a race war has been averted. This is typical from the Telegraph again. Islamic terrorists could target right-wing fanatics to spark a race war in Britain, it was feared last night. But by far the spiked article, Muslims vs EDL, a car crash of civilisations, from Patrick Hayes, was the most entertaining. Patrick starts by saying neither the English Defence League nor Islamist extremists could organise a fry-up in a chippy, so why the hysteria? And quickly moves on to describe the 6 Lions' cunning plan to blow up an English Defence League march. Popping along to the march with sawn-off shotguns, swords, knives, a modified firework full of shrapnel and components for a pipe bomb. Only the EDL demo had finished by the time they showed up. They decided to visit a local chippy and then drive home, only to be stopped by traffic police. These lovers of death evidently believed they had no need for car insurance, so their car, complete with shotguns and bombs inside, was impounded. When the pound opened on Monday, their weapons store was quickly discovered, and following a manhunt across Birmingham, they were arrested. So we have Islamo-fascists incapable of carrying out an attack against a much-feared English fascist threat that is actually not that threatening. The real farce here lies with the incompetent bearded buffoons who can't tell the time, or the EDL's lack of staying power, but with those hysterical critics who have been writing endless scare stories depicting the EDL v Islam political pantomime as the epic tragedy of our age. One of the buffoons he references is former Trotskyite Peter Hitchens of the Daily Mail. World at 8 says, one way to disseminate future trouble is to laugh at it, and he has done a good job, but never underestimate either faction. Somalian sex attacker can't be booted out of the UK. The Home Office has been blocked from booting an illegal immigrant Somalian sex offender and robber Ahmed Hersi, 26, of Birmingham, out of the UK because it would breach his human rights. Hersi was jailed for 12 weeks for sexual assault in 2011 and convicted of criminal damage in 2009 after the European Court of Human Rights stopped his deportation from the UK. His bags were packed as long ago as August 13, 2007, after he was sentenced to 3 years in a Young Offenders Institute for street robbery, and as a juvenile he was twice placed on probation for shoplifting. But Hersi believes he is the victim. Hersi from Small Heath said, "I've been here since I was 8. I can hardly speak Somalian. I don't remember my motherland. They'll see me as this rich kid from England. I've been placed in the box by the immigration department, a box that is on fire. I'm being treated like a pet dog. If you tell a pet dog to stay in that room, it will stay in that room. It was a stupid, irrational thing to do," he said. "It doesn't shine in a good light on me, but I was high on cannabis. I'm not trying to deny I have a criminal past," he said. "My argument is that had I been given some form of access to do something productive when I was released, things would have been different. I can't even do voluntary work. There were 2 co-defendants in the robbery case and they now have jobs, cars and homes. I was not given that opportunity. I'm 26 and my life is on hold. Yes, I made a mistake. Why was I not given the opportunity to repent? There are rapists and paedophiles being released and they are re-offending. How can I be deported for one mistake? I've been in the deportation process for almost 6 years, during which I've been detained on numerous occasions. Surely I've earned the right to have my case revisited. I used to say, if you're going to do it, do it. Now I say, I'm not going anywhere." Well, today states, this idiot should be deported for talking tripe. Never heard such a string of excuses. Send him back and his family. He can't have travelled alone here at 8, or did he? European news. The big chill as Berlin declares France a problem state. Tensions between France and Germany rose yet another notch last week after months of clashing over what policies to adopt in order to end the economic crisis. The most recent conflict concerns a leaked draft of an internal document of France's ruling Socialist Party, intended for discussion at a party conference. The draft document rails against German Chancellor Angela Merkel's selfish intransience, although a more watered-down tone features in the final document to be adopted on April the 30th. This is a far cry from the friendly quibbles previously mentioned by French President François Hollande. Now the honeymoon is over. Franco-German relations have been cooled by the Euro crisis, remarks the Business Daily Handelsblatt. In the wake of the harsh criticism of the German Chancellor levelled by France's socialists, both governments attempted to limit the damage. However, now Angela Merkel's second-in-command has poured petrol on the flames. Finance Minister Philipp Rösler recently authored a report obtained by the newspaper which enumerates the economic and political weaknesses of Germany's neighbour. In particular, it singles out the increasing cost of labour and high payroll taxes, the shortest working hours in the EU and the highest tax and social welfare burden in the Eurozone. According to Rösler, French competitiveness is in a decline and industries struggling under the weight of taxes are leaving the country, explains Handelsblatt. France is drifting south, argues the minister, who believes that the country can no longer play a stabilising role in the euro crisis. Athens police make good mayor's vow to prevent Golden Dawn handing out free food in Syntagma Square. Athens Mayor Georgios Kaminis had vowed to prevent far-right Golden Dawn from handing out free food in Syntagma Square on Thursday. The neo-fascists, Greek patriots, announced that they would be handing out food ahead of the Easter weekend in a rerun of an event they held in front of Parliament last year, when goods were given only to those who could prove that they were Greek. However, the police in the Greek capital Athens have stopped the nationalist Golden Dawn party from handing out free food only to Greeks on the city's main square. Riot police used tear gas to prevent activists distributing food from a lorry on Syntagma Square, where the country's parliament is located. A related news story carried by our own BBC, Greek villagers block Golden Dawn food handout on Tassos, is branded false. Golden Dawn has slammed what they claim are the false communications parroted by the Greek media from a report by the Athens news agency. According to Ekshay, the food distribution was entirely successful and over 100 families received a share of the 50 kilos of fish and 150 kilos of potatoes and legumes distributed. The political party stated a small group arrived shouting abusive slogans against Golden Dawn, but were drowned out by those singing the national anthem. Polls released this weekend show support for Golden Dawn is now in double figures. World at 8 comments. Good for Golden Dawn, sticking to their guns. We're talking about a country here who during the last war welcomed the German invasion and indeed still caters to them for holidays in preference to the Brits, as indeed did parts of Italy. If we in the UK ever reach the plight of the Greek people for food parcels, I have a feeling that the Lib Dems or UKIP wouldn't be in the forefront for handing them out to Brits only. Turkey becomes partner of China, Russia-led security bloc. NATO member Turkey signed up on Friday to become a dialogue partner of a security bloc dominated by China and Russia and declared that its destiny is in Asia. This is really a historic day for us, Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said in Kazakhstan's commercial capital Almaty after signing a memorandum of understanding with Shanghai Cooperation Organization Secretary General Dmitry Mezentsev. Now, with this choice, Turkey is declaring that our destiny is the same as the destiny of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries. China, Russia and 4 Central Asian nations, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, formed the SCO in 2001. Turkey has displayed interest in closer ties with the SCO at a time when it is upset by the slow progress of accession talks with the European Union. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan speak Turkic languages, and while pledging to cooperate with the SCO economically and in fighting terrorist threats and drug trade together, Davutoglu stressed common historic roots. Turkey will be part of a family which is composed of the countries which lived together not for centuries, for millennia, he said. Turkey's dialogue partner status, also granted to Sri Lanka and ex-Soviet state Belarus, is below that of the observer status held by India, Pakistan, Mongolia, Iran and Afghanistan, which participates in SCO meetings but have no right to vote. World at 8 says, as one of those easy to miss news reports, this one is doubly concerning. Now, I'm no fan of the EU, but what is Turkey, a NATO member and potential new EU state, doing? Let me see. Probably seeing that the EU is finished financially, and being Turkish and in an increasingly Islamic state, they're going where the money is and will be in the future. Anything to keep them out of Europe, I say. Nick sends his apologies. He's on the road back from Maryport following the day's count and plans to protest the council's actions, or rather inactions, that denied many registered voters their right to vote. You will find further details in a letter from National Nominating Officer Clive Jefferson to Harry Dyke, Chief Executive of the Allerdale Council, at BNP taking action over multiple fraud by council on the British National Party website. As Nick promised several weeks ago, the Maryport election was home to a new election strategy. Just as plans are underway to challenge the electoral irregularities in Maryport, plans are being developed to train our organisers and activists in the deployment of the highest successful tactics that more than doubled our vote to 40% in Maryport to reach second place with 811 votes, less than 100 behind Labour's 905 and almost 7 times UKIP's paltry 127. World news. Austerity is hurting our health, say researchers. Austerity is having a devastating effect on health in Europe and North America, driving suicide, depression and infectious diseases and reducing access to medicines and care, researchers said on Monday. Detailing a decade of research, Oxford University political economist David Stuckler and Sanjay Basu, an assistant professor of medicine and an epidemiologist at Stanford University, said their findings show austerity is seriously bad for health. In a book to be published this week, the researchers say that more than 10,000 suicides and up to 1 million cases of depression have been diagnosed during what they call the Great Recession, and its accompanying austerity across Europe and North America. In Greece, moves like cutting HIV prevention budgets have coincided with rates of AIDS-causing virus rising by more than 200% since 2011, driven in part by increasing drug abuse in the context of a 50% youth unemployment rate. Greece also experienced its first malaria outbreak in decades following budget cuts to mosquito spraying programmes. World at 8 says, this sounds like propaganda. Not all ills can be placed at austerity's door. We're told in other articles that austerity is good for us health-wise, so how about their increasing immigrant problem? No problems health-wise there then. 64% of Muslims in Egypt and Pakistan support the death penalty for leaving Islam. The Pew Research Centre's vast new study on the views and attitudes of global Muslim populations is bound to create controversy. According to Pew's data, 78% of Afghan Muslims say they support laws condemning to death anyone who gives up Islam. In both Egypt and Pakistan, 64% report holding this view. This is also the majority view amongst Muslims in Malaysia, Jordan and the Palestinian territories. Abandoning Islam is traditionally considered not just apostasy, as is in other religions, but a specific transgression called ridda. In the first days of Islam, the religion was also a physical community under siege from outside forces and facing the possibility of fracturing within. To leave the faith was also to abandon the larger community, a crime considered akin to treason in the way we understand it in the West. The weird obsession with chemical weapons. Tim Black, a senior writer at Spiked, begins, "If Assad really has killed 15 people with sarin, why is that worse than his slaughter of thousands of others with bullets and bombs? It seems fairly likely, but still uncertain, that the government forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad deployed some sort of chemical weapon against rebels in the cities of Aleppo, Homs and Damascus. Intelligence agencies in Israel, UK, France and the US certainly seem convinced, as indeed do politicians. But here's the question few seem to be asking. So what? That is not to diminish or demean the deaths of the 15, or so alleged to have been killed by some sort of chemical agent. Rather, it is to ask, what makes those deaths so different from the 70,000 others who have lost their lives during the 2-year-long Syrian conflict? There certainly seems to be an assumption that these deaths are different, that in short a handful of chemically aided fatalities are somehow more morally repugnant than the tens of thousands of non-chemically aided deaths. For some yet obscure ethical reason, the means of death appear to matter to Western observers. Burning people alive or mangling them to death are, it seems, deemed lesser wrongs than suffocating people using a nerve agent. World at 8 says, Tim goes on further and makes a very good argument for his thesis. Whilst I agree with Tim that whether a chemical agent, a bullet or a bomb, what does it matter how one is killed? What does make the matter of the deaths of 15 more repugnant and worthy of revenge than the 70,000 or so killed to date? Tim did not address the fact that Islamic extremists have seized an opportunity, with Western support, to rebel against their government. There was a time when Western governments would have been just as thorough in their prosecution of war against rebels as the Syrian government. As a matter of fact, over 500,000 Americans died during a rebellion in the 1860s, and almost 90,000 Americans, British and other Europeans died during a rebellion in the 1770s. Rebellions take lives on both sides. That is the nature of rebellion and war. All the rhetoric from the West is simply a poor justification for an unjust interest in an unjust undertaking. For the life of me, I still can't understand why the West is so determined to oust Assad and replace him with an Islamic fundamentalist government. My thought for the day. Prophet Afzal or Prophet Farage? My thought for the day is choice. We all have choices in life. In fact, we all have very many, some of which we take, some of which we don't, some of which we do and regret it, and some of which prove to be the right ones. This choice also applies to the media, TV and the general public. And so far as this goes, the lot of them seem to be making a wrong choice. I am talking politically in this paragraph. Farage is riding high in the south of this country, which is temporary and will be in the end a wrong choice. But he does have something in common with the man I am going to be talking about today. Nazir Afzal has a great common denominator with our Nige. That common denominator is, apart from a ridge running up their butts from fence sitting, the complete and utter belief that everything from what they describe as the far right is wrong. Farage gained a few votes from the disenchanted Middle England when he said that UKIP wouldn't take anyone from an extremist party, and of course highlighted our British National Party. And Afzal, of course, denies our very existence, let alone our very real concerns for our country. So a great tie-up here for these two market traders. Ever wonder why the sign of UKIP is a pound sign? Another thing he has in common with Afzal: blinding ambition. Now, I like ambition. Like justice, if well placed, it makes the bedrock for economy, industry and a well-run country. Blinded, it can and does make idiots of us all. Take the cases of the sexual abuse and Operation U-Tree that's hit our headlines of late. We have a series of well-known and in most cases well-loved and popular white actors and celebs all being charged with abuse of one form or another, but mainly kissing and groping. Poor old Ken Roach has been charged with the actual act of rape on a 15-year-old girl in 1967. Hell, 1967? That was 46 years ago. I've heard of cold cases, but that really does take the biscuit. And I read from The Sun. Corrie legend Bill Roach was last night charged with raping a 15-year-old girl. The 81-year-old icon, who has played Ken Barlow since the soap's first episode in 1960, was dramatically arrested at 8 AM yesterday at his £750,000 home. He was charged with 2 counts of rape in Haslingden, Lancs in 1967. He was released on bail but will be written out of the ITV1 soap while he battles the 2 charges. Cast pals was said to be close to tears. He stated, but things were very different in the 70s. People were a lot more tactile. You did things that today are regarded as wrong. A lot of these offences that you're talking about are just inappropriate touching, which 20, 30, 40 years ago it was sort of understood that you did. In a way, that's how you found out. Someone said you touched inappropriately, they said don't do that, and you didn't do that. That was the end of it. Our, and I use that word very loosely indeed, Nazir Afzal, Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS Northwest, is having a field day with these scandals and has said, having completed our review, we have concluded that there is sufficient evidence and it is in the public interest for Mr Roach to be charged with 2 offences of rape relating to a girl aged 15 between April and July 1967. He will appear at Preston Magistrates Court on May the 14th. Jim Davison, 59, was detained over historic sex allegations not involving children shortly before he was due to appear on Celebrity Big Brother in January and re-arrested last week over new allegations dating back to 1978. His second arrest came a week after DJ Dave Lee Travers, 67, was re-arrested over sex allegations involving adults. He too denies wrongdoing. At his £1 million home in Stockbridge, Hampshire, Mr Davison said yesterday, the pendulum has now swung right to the other end, from doing nothing with Savile to this. He added, the allegations against me are to do with adults and go back over 35 years. One is from 1978, and the only thing I remember from back then is ABBA. Poor old Freddie Starr was also taken into custody near his home in Warwickshire and questioned over claims he tried to grope a woman called Karen Ward when she was 14. Ward, who waived her right to anonymity, claimed Starr had had a very bad attack of wandering hands with her nearly 40 years ago. He vehemently denied her claims. It prompted Starr to seek an injunction to prevent the claims being aired, but his High Court application was rejected. Blazing forth from the Daily Mail and others, the former It's a Knockout presenter Stuart Hall is facing prison after he admitted a catalogue of sex abuse allegations dating back nearly 50 years. The veteran broadcaster was described by Afzal as an opportunistic predator, whose 13 victims included a 9-year-old girl who he sexually assaulted in her bedroom whilst attending a dinner party at her parents' house. Another victim, then aged 17, described how she was pushed up against the wall and attacked after auditioning as a cheerleader during filming of the long-running TV competition. The investigation by Lancashire Police began after a woman contacted independent columnist Yasmin Alabai Brown in the wake of the Jimmy Savile abuse scandal. The woman described how she was invited to the BBC studios in Manchester after meeting Hall at a school prize giving and later abused. 10 victims subsequently came forward following the initial publicity surrounding the case. Today Hall, aged 83, admitted 14 counts of sexual assault which ranged from kissing to the digital penetration of his 13 predominantly teenage victims. From Reuters, last week's celebrity publicist Max Clifford, 70, whose clients have included the X Factor reality TV creator Simon Cowell, was charged by police after he was accused of 11 offences of indecent assault between 1966 and 1985. Australian children's entertainer Rolf Harris, 83, who once painted the Queen's portrait, former BBC radio DJ Dave Lee Travis, 67, praised by Myanmar's Aung San Suu Kyi for keeping her entertained during years of house arrest, and comedian Freddie Starr, 70, are also those arrested. Now, amidst this plethora of wrongdoings, and I'm not dismissing these various claims as ridiculous, which they would have been several years ago, most of them having been inappropriate gropings of one sort or another. But by the same rule, time and distance lends enchantment, and to be frank, I was a teenager during the 60s, but married, so well out of reach of possible predators. But I still had hormones, and just because I was not one of the thousands of female fans who belted up to the nearest broadcasting place, theatre, whatever, to see these guys, I can still remember, however vaguely, what being that age felt like. And quite honestly, if Paul Anka, remember him, or Cliff Richard had come up to me and groped me, I wouldn't have said a word, because these men were like young gods to the average teenager, and that is a fact. That is why these girls, and I can't speak for the 9-year-old girl, made every effort to crawl over these celebs at every opportunity, and if they hadn't given out the apparently wrong signals, now, after 50 years, things would have progressed, I would have thought, to the final act of intercourse. I quote, "Earlier this month, Nazir Afzal, Chief Crown Prosecutor in the North West, said detectives will soon arrest a number of very high-profile figures suspected of child sex abuse. He described child sex abuse investigations as a growing industry. However, critics have said that Mr Afzal should not hype up any impending arrests like a box office event. A number of defence lawyers believe there should now be a new debate over whether those suspected of sex offences, particularly those allegedly involving children, should be named before they're convicted." So what is the problem here? Race hatred, money and publicity, that is what. And our pal Afzal is hot to trot on these particular tales, whilst ignoring the terrorist trials in his area, which are being held at this moment in time and make good reading for the race hatred angle, or rather religious hatred angle, always ignored by both Afzal and the media. In fact, it's clearly not in the public interest to arrest more Muslims in the underage grooming scandal, or to concentrate too much on the terrorists all willing and happy to blow us to bits. There isn't a peep out of Afzal in the latest terrorism case on the 6 Muslims who missed bombing an EDL march and will be sentenced on June the 6th, or indeed any of the other similar cases concerning his countrymen and their proclivities. Omar Mohammed Khan, 28, Mohammed Hassin, 23, Anzal Hussain, 24, Mohammed Saud, 22, and Sohab Ahmed, 22, and Jewel Uddin, 27, all so-called British nationals, but all Muslim, appeared at Woolwich Crown Court. The court heard they planned to ambush EDL marchers using shotguns, explosives, knives and swords. West Midlands police have had to defend their actions surrounding the case after it emerged one of the men Uddin had been under low-level surveillance in connection with another terrorist plot. When searching the boot of Khan's car, the police found 2 sawn-off shotguns and ammunition, as well as an improvised explosive device packed with 458 pieces of metal shrapnel, including nails, 3 partially constructed pipe bombs, samurai swords, machetes and numerous knives. Also in the boot of the car were 10 leaflets dated the day of the planned attack, June the 30th. Titled Operation in Defence of the Prophet Muhammad, the leaflets were set out in the men's justification for the attack, and I quote, "To the enemies of Allah and his messenger, this is a message to the kafar female devil, the self-proclaimed Queen Elizabeth and her cursed jubilee, fooling a nation of blind sheep. To the EDL, English Drunkards League, enemies of Allah, today is a day for retaliation for your blasphemy of Allah and his messenger Muhammad. We love death more than you love life. The penalty for blasphemy of Allah and his messenger is death." One chilling thought for the people in this country is the statement the West Midlands police say, that outside of London the biggest threat from Al-Qaeda inspired terrorism comes from this area of Birmingham. It's a stronghold of the hardline Deobandi Islamic sect, which began as a movement against British imperialism in India. The modern day Taliban are Deobandis. But along with having to justify the arrests of these Muslim bastards, the Assistant Chief Constable Marcus Beale from West Midlands Police said the Muslim community was actively working with them to deal with the threat of terrorism. Now I've heard it all, but not from Afzal, who I would have thought should have said something over these arrests and trials, if only to condemn them, which he hasn't. The other cases on which Afzal is strangely silent of late of the Muslim sexual abuse of underage girls in his area of Muslim fiefdom. When googled, the last entry on any of these cases was a relatively new casuals blog from January 2013, The Telegraph May 2012 and the BBC cover-up of January 2011. Even more ignored is the Derby Muslim case of 2010. Afzal is famously quoted in nationalist circles as pronouncing this widely spreading problem as Asian, and mainly from the Pakistani communities. And he has widely ignored this problem since it's reared its very ugly head in the public domain after a Channel 4 programme titled Asian Grooming Gangs was shown in October 2010. In 2004, Channel 4 withdrew Edge of the City, its controversial documentary made by Annie Hall that depicted parents trying to stop groups of young Asian men grooming white girls as young as 11 for sex. The reason? It had been seized on by the British National Party during a party political broadcast. Colin Cramphorn, the then Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, joined groups such as Unite Against Fascism in calling the documentary to be withdrawn. Channel 4 complied, saying that the issue was not censorship but timing because of the proximity with the local and European elections. But many argued at the time that the delay in transmission had strengthened the case of the British National Party. It was in 2003 that Anne Cryer and British National Party chairman Nick Griffin first tried to draw the public's attention to it, but she was stifled and Nick Griffin was arrested. As you can see from above, there is an awful similarity between Afzal and Farage. Both have jumped on the anti-right and anti-white bandwagon to further their own ends, which are both financial and political. At least Afzal does have the weird machinations of his own people to consider. Remember, a Muslim is a Muslim first of all, no matter what his adoptive sentiments may appear, whereas Farage is English and should stand by his own people. Afzal will no doubt be heard trumping on about our elderly white guys and their penchant for girls 50 years ago, and no doubt these now almost elderly women will flaunt their pathetic stories and hope to gain publicity and monies in lieu of the so-called ruination of their lives. And they will be guilty of blowing acts out of all proportion, do excuse the pun. Those days of the 60s and 70s were totally different and in a fashion much easier to live in than nowadays, where one is not allowed any freedom of action or speech. And I mean you can't even slap your own child, even if they're appallingly badly behaved, without being sued. And we can't obviously stop our young girls from getting drunk and being abducted, abused and pimped out by Muslims either. I'm sure you can see how one-sided our social norms are becoming, and indeed how we as a people are ignoring or putting to one side subjects that should be addressed and harping on about minor subjects that are really not that important. One must also take into account why the silence on the part of one of the most powerful Muslims in Britain. We, or rather the great British public, have given him this power and he is abusing it. He, like most other Muslims, don't like or admire the Brits at all. Their culture and their religion are at direct odds with the British or Western cultures. They will never meet in peace but in enmity. And we are only delaying the day of reckoning, never stopping it. So we have Afzal hyping up old white guys, dumbing down Muslim terrorists who are clearly out to kill as many of us as possible, and sidestepping the bloody puddle of our underage girls being ruined for life by his own people. Now perhaps you will get the awful similarity between Afzal and Farage. Deny, deny, deny. But still fool people into thinking you care. Very clever, very plausible and very financially and publicly rewarding. Hats off, or should I say niqabs. And finally, bacon, black pud, and what's that? It's been reported by Sky News that a rare elephant bird egg sold for $66,675 at Christie's auction house. The intact egg was laid by the now extinct great elephant bird of Madagascar. This creature, possibly the largest bird ever, is believed to have been hunted to extinction between the 14th and 17th centuries in Madagascar and grew to well over 3 metres 11 foot in height. The partly fossilised egg is 30 centimetres high and 21 centimetres in diameter, more than 100 times the size of a chicken egg. Although fragments can be found on the island, intact specimens are extremely rare. The egg, which has been valued at 20 to 30,000 prior to sale, was one of the most celebrated lots at Christie's Travel, Science and Natural History sale in London. This presenter says, well, I'm sorry for this bird, it must have been a wonderful sight to behold, but it must have tasted a bit too much like chicken for it to be hunted down so much. Pity we didn't have it in Europe, it might have fared slightly better, and we would hope. Perhaps they can get some DNA from it and clone a breeding pair. Now that would be interesting. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and safe weekend and bank holiday. We will not be broadcasting on Monday the 6th of May, but we'll be back with you Wednesday the 8th of May. Thank you.